All right, Scott, welcome back. It's good to have you on again. And you're in the middle of quite a big transition in your life right now. Is that right?
That's right. We're getting ready to move to Atlanta, start a new venture in the great city of Dunwoody with a great ministry. And we're just looking forward to getting boots on the ground and getting started. But more importantly, just praying that we can find the right house and community to live in.
Yeah. You have a 20 plus year experience in tech um, throughout a lot of different venues at this point. From your experience, how would you categorize what's happening now in the world of technology and what's coming around the corner? Does this feel like same old, or does this feel like a time of radical difference that we're walking into?
Well, here's the thing. It's kind of interesting is that it reminds me of just how things have perpetuated through history. So if you start with Gutenberg, when he invented the printing press, prior to that, royalty were the only people that got access to books. But once printing press was invented, it produced literature for basically the masses out there. But then, if you really think about it, you have the telegraph that really changed things up in the way we communicated in wireless telegraphs, radio, TV, and then of course we got this wonderful thing called the internet. And companies like Google wanted to catalog and provide information to the world. And now we have this wonderful thing that has creeped on our doorstep called Chat GT or GPT and AI. And it's not so much the same. It is just a what I would call an advanced area of computational sciences that is really just not only emerged onto our doorstep, but now it has accelerated the way in which we just gather information. So while it can be kind of terrifying for some, it's actually exciting for a lot of other areas.
Okay. For a listener who has not really had their heads in the weeds yet on this, in the simplest terms possible, can you explain what we're talking about with Chat GPT and any other kind of technology that is very similar to that?
So when we think about ChatGPT, what it is it's using an artificial intelligence algorithm that basically helps us to look for patterns, things that if you're looking, say, for like you and I were talking the other day, helping to write a sermon, um, it is compiling. A number of sources together to hopefully help us to make a pattern of recognition that can be similar to the human brain. If that's just kind of putting it simply into a nutshell. Think of it as a super engine, but it's a whole lot more than that because as it's building these things, it's also learning.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, and you probably will know much better than me, but I've heard that like Chat GPT has scrubbed like 10% of the internet or something like that. So it's not getting active live updates. I think the last update that I saw was somewhere in 2021. But if it's 5% or it's 10%, that is still an absolutely astronomical volume of information. So when we talk about it's doing stuff in a similar way to the human brain, it's like the human brain, if the human brain had read and could in some way remember 10% of what's been posted on the internet. Is that number accurate, or is that just a gross exaggeration?
I would say it's a good assumption. I mean, what it is, I mean, and again, this is such a new technology and it's continuing to grow. Chat GPT is now on its fourth versioning. If you were to go and log in right now, you basically are at the 3.5, but depending on how you're accessing Chat GPT, and other services out there. Google's got Bard, of course. Bing, which is a Microsoft product, is using AI. So while it's very new, it's rapidly changing. So I would say it's a good assumption.
Okay. And so for a parent, when I look at this stuff, and it's really just been in, I think, the last 2 months or so that it's come on my radar, but it's felt revolutionary. And as I've described to people, I say, I feel like this is potentially like the time of your life before the iPhone, and then imagine what life is going to be like 3 or 4 years later. And in some ways you just can't you have no frame of reference for it, because people had cell phones before the iPhones, and cell phones had little MP3 players on them, and you could do basic text messaging. But you went from that to walking around with a supercomputer in your pocket that was, I mean, calling it a phone at this point is it's like not even the most accurate thing of what it does, because it's a video camera, it's a recording device, it's an internet access device, it's a computer, it's a GPS monitor, it's all of these things that also happens to make phone calls. And that has been so revolutionary. It's hard to imagine functioning now. And our kids especially, they have incredible anxiety if they don't have their phone, but so do a ton of adults. And I feel like we're on the front end of something like that. So as we talk today, we're trying to imagine something that is in some way unimaginable. But where do you see, at least on the front end, in the next 6 months to year, how do you think parents and families are going to first start encountering and maybe benefiting from Chat GPT or AI resources like that?
Well, it's a good question. Right now, I'm going to start here because it is the hottest topic in education.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there have been those that have written articles and have worked with it to write papers. So again, plagiarism, how this is going to change education, that's where this is a big discussion point. Well, here's the thing, though, too. Those that are doing this, of course, the technology is going to evolve, but you really do have to work with the technology to make it do what you want it to do. You just don't sit down and say, "Write me a paper on history," and it writes the paper. It does take a little bit of a little bit of work on your part. But I would say, really, with parents right now, I think education is going to be one of those key pieces, because it can help with research. I'm not going to lie. I've played with it. It's really amazing when it comes to business. There's some really interesting applications where it can be extremely helpful. In fact, with Microsoft, they're incorporating some AI to help you after a Teams meeting to formulate basically an after action review. But with Chat GTP, and especially in education, where I think this is going to change some things, especially for not only parents, but for educators, is gone are the days of multiple choice tests. Gone are the days of these canned solutions that we've seen from a lot of areas. In fact, the gentleman who developed the multiple choice test, I remember Tim Elmore highlighted this in one of his books. Multiple choice tests were recommended not to ever be used in education, because it would basically make students a little bit more lazy in that sense. I mean, there's a 1 in 10 shot you're going to get the question right. But what this is going to do for education is it's going to make us be more engaged, meaning that, okay, let's really see how you formulated that answer. So it may go back to a little bit of a more Socratic type of interaction, because when you do use things like multiple choice tests or canned responses, the problem with that is that they end up on places like Chegg, which is a site where students are going to get those answers. They call it a tutoring site, but really it's a place where most educators out there know what it is. And so really with ChatGPT, you're going to have to engage people more. So I think that's one of the things that's going to change in education. But with parents, again, it's going to make them have to be a little bit more involved in their son or daughter's lives, because when it comes to their education and where they're getting that information, right now we're saying, hey, you need to know how to research on the internet. Chat GTP and AI, you're going to have to do a little bit of fact checking, because kind of
Mhm.
like what you and I have talked about, is that, for example, you were telling me about, you had used it once and it blurted out Hebrews 17. Well, the
Right. Yep.
problem with that is you and I both know there's no Hebrews 17. So you have to be a little bit more educated to look for those false positives. And while there's a positive with the research, and if we can teach you how to use that technology, there's also a danger of just gravitating to misinformation. And we've seen that
Yeah.
Hollywood has taken liberties with movies, and some people will go out and they'll see a movie. Like, here's a good example: the Imitation Game. The way that Hollywood portrays Alan Turing is he single-handedly won World War II and cracked the Enigma code. Yet we had a series or a group of Polish mathematicians who had actually cracked the Enigma back in 1932. So you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of liberties there, and so with Chat GTP, there's going to be so much information at our fingertips that we also have to be discerning on what that is. So for the parent, they're going to have to get more involved, but also too, we're just going to have to be a little bit more on our toes as far as engaging each other.
Yeah. So let me give you some examples that I think go along with that, because I've been exploring a lot of different ways to use it in the last couple of months of like, how can this help in my professional life? How can this help in my personal life? One of the things that was amazing is I was able, with two different technologies, I was able to take an episode of Let's Parent on Purpose that had been recorded, put it in this technology called Otter.ai, which is a transcription service where, I dumped the MP3 of my podcast in, and then 10, 12 minutes later, it gave me a full several thousand word transcript of like Scott's talking, now Jay's talking, with timestamps of when it happened. And it was
Mhm.
largely accurate. I mean, which is
Mhm.
amazing when you think of voices and everything like that, largely accurate. So now I have a transcript. And then I was able to take that transcript, throw it on Google Docs as a PDF, go on Chat GPT and say, read this transcript and produce for me SEO optimized show notes of my podcast, and pull out 5 potential social media quotes from it. And in about 20 seconds, it did it. And it was mind blowing how good it was. Now, here's the interesting thing: it wasn't perfect. I have to go in and modify it a little bit. So, I can't automate that process. And let me give you a couple other examples like that. I was doing a study for a youth lesson series on our identity in Christ and who Christ is. And so, I have a bunch of different Bible study software, but it's like, let's see what Chat GPT can do. And it was astounding because I started with a list of like, I know these verses are about identity in Christ. And so I threw them in and said, show me these verses in the ESV and tell me, what do they say about identity in Christ? And then boom, instantly it has them all together in a group. And then I said, are there any more that I'm missing from the New Testament that also speak to the identity of Christ? And then it replies, sure. Romans 5:8 says this. And, Hebrews 10:15 says this, and also Hebrews 17:14 says this, and Hebrews 18:27 says this. Now, I know that the book of Hebrews ends in chapter 13. And so, I then push back and say, where are you getting your information from? There is no Hebrews 17. There is no Hebrews 18. And then it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I gave you bad information. I meant Revelation 20:13 or whatever it was. So it was very helpful. But if I didn't know my Bible, I would just have in my youth lessons thrown up verse references that are fictional in there. And I think when you're talking about education, that's one of the things that we have to be careful of. I have found Chat GPT to be a way more helpful place to start a search than Google at this point, because anything I put in Google, the first 10 things that come up are paid advertisements. And so you're just weeding through all of that, and it's hard to get the actual information you need. But at the same time, Chat GPT is not a genius. Chat GPT is scrubbing the 10% of the internet that it has read, and think about what you have actually read on the internet. A lot of it's garbage. And so some of the information it's pulling is from Wikipedia or from the actual Bible. And then some of it, who knows where it's coming from. And when you ask, where did you get this information? It will never tell you. It says, sorry, I pull it from the sources that I've read. Okay, what are those? And it will never tell you. So there's a real danger with that. But then on the other hand, I have said, these are the ingredients that I have in my refrigerator. What's a good recipe that I can use for tonight? And then boom, it will pull out like a recipe using those ingredients with the cooking instructions. And it's amazing. So I can see fast ways that this is going to become very helpful to households, but also I can see ways even on the front end of how, especially kids with academics or even parents researching a subject, is like, if you don't double check, you're going to get yourself in trouble. Like going to Chat GPT for medical advice could be really helpful or make you ignore signs of cancer. So like, oh, that's great, unless it kills you. So we are very much still on the front end of like, be careful with what you're reading in that. Do you have anything to add to that of like other examples you've seen to be careful of?
Well, I'm just gonna jump into something that's gonna sound really geeky, but Star Trek: The Next Generation. So one of the reasons I bring this up is I love the characters and the leaders there. Throughout the series, you hear them say "computer," and they
Yeah.
ask it a question, and it gives them whatever answer it is. In the series, the computers have evolved to give us the knowledge when we need it. But here's the thing: it's kind of interesting. Whether they're fixing a reactor or they're getting ready to do battle, they have to use their wits about them. In other words, the computer's not doing it. In fact, I also bring up another area that, I just kind of say, we just also need to be careful and be discerning as humans. Because if you remember the movie War Games from the 1980s, and then there was also another movie called The Net. They basically, in War Games, they take everything, bring it to NORAD, and the computers take over at a certain point when a decision's made.
Mhm.
And then if you look at the movie The Net, I remember where Sandra Bullock's character goes into the hospital and says her friend was allergic to, say, I think it was penicillin. And the woman's looking at the computer. Well, no, the computer's telling me this. So at some point, we also need to have discernment. And I guess that's really where I'm coming from is that, even Stephen Hawking said in 2014, artificial intelligence is powerful, but it could also spell the end of the human race. It could actually, and I'm not saying that to go
Right.
conspiracy
No.
theory and whatnot, but like anything that's good, we can take it to an extreme.
Right.
And I totally agree that there are so many helpful things that we can do with it, but we also have to be very careful of not becoming what I would say perpetually lazy. Because as you can read articles out here that AI is going to lead to job loss. Yes and no, because just as you pointed out, you got a transcript inside of an engine that can basically take your audio and transcribe it for you. Microsoft's been doing that in Microsoft Teams for quite a while now within the Teams platform. In fact, you get a transcript as soon as you finish. But is it perfect? Absolutely not.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that we have to be careful of. So when you think of this tool, it's just like anything. I remember our parents when we were growing up. Oh, you've got to watch out for those computers, so on and so forth. And they were thinking we were spending too much time behind a screen. But you know what? Here's the thing, man. Right now, there was an article just released a couple days ago, just talking about one of the biggest issues that they're having with Gen Z in the workforce is social interactions.
Mhm.
So again, we have to be careful that we know when to use technology and when to use the gray matter between our ears.
Yeah. One of the other areas that I think I'm just dreading is the realization that every time some new technology comes out, one of the pioneers of it is the porn industry. The pornography industry is the first one to jump on every kind of new technology. So whether it was Betamax or VHS or DVD or live streaming, you have the pornography industry because there's so much money behind it, pushing towards that. And so this is going to, I guarantee you that that every pornography company is now, and probably has been for some time, dreaming and imagining how are we going to profit off of this artificial intelligence technology, making customizable pornography experiences for individuals. And we already know that porn has devastated a couple of generations at this point, and has radically affected marriages, radically affected, the ability to sexually connect for a lot of young men. And this is going to be one more area of it. So in this sense, like, part of why I want to have this discussion today is that, there's going to be good. It's just like your phone. There's so many amazing things that you can do because of your phone. And there are a lot of dangers out there. And as a mom and dad, we can't be so far behind what's coming in technology that we find out about it once our kid is so entrapped in there. So just even having some kind of awareness and realizing this is coming on the radar, is something really helpful that parents need to think about. In that realm, you were nodding your head as I was speaking. In that realm, you have any comments to say as far as the potential or what we need to be aware of?
Yeah, so I've had this discussion with my friend Matt McKee and Titania Jordan with an organ. They basically have a company called Bark, and this is the world they live in, each and every day. And Titania's been doing some really amazing, basically outputs to parents. So, for example, we're talking about AI now, but let's take a step back to something called TikTok. She did a quick video on basically how TikTok can take a 42-year-old woman and turn her into a 16-year-old.
Unbelievable.
That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And when you
that's
start talking about
already
these,
now. That's just not like in the future. You're
yes,
saying right now. Okay.
right now, that's just TikTok. That's not AI. That is just simply what they've put in there for filtering. So imagine what a 42-year-old man could do, turning himself into a 16-year-old to proposition a young girl. So we're dealing with that type of stuff now. And again, we can go down a whole slew of rabbit trails, but that's the point here, is that it's gone as the day that, oh, my kids know more about technology than we do. They may know how to use technology, but in the workforce today, that's not going to cut it. There's using technology and there's innovating. And when we start talking about parenting, one of the things Bark has really been a proponent and been a big partner of mine over the years is that we're helping to educate everybody, both the kids and the parents. Because think about this, the stuff that you put on the internet today, because of AI, can propagate so much faster than it ever has before, as you've said. But we also have to think about things like, we talk about fake information. We talk about being emotionally tied to our technology. So there was one article I read day before yesterday, and just talking about how AI could be that friend for your kid. Okay, so now that gets kind of creepy too, because again, technology is made by man. And, it's funny, but 2001 A Space Odyssey, we talk about the computer HAL. That's the kind of creepiness that can kind of step into your room. And especially when you start talking about pornography and you start talking about the dark side of some social issues, not only can it perpetuate good information, but it can also perpetuate false information, as well as it replacing our human interactions. And if we're not careful, there can be a generation that doesn't know how to interact with individuals around them or the world around them. And we're now living in this world of isolation. And I think for kids, especially, this is where parents need to understand that they need to set those boundaries with the technology, because if not, it could be something that can come back to bite them later down the road as basically their child grows up, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. I think as we're thinking about, okay, as a parent, what's helpful from, and this is like a lot of information and it can be scary. I think one of the things that would just be really helpful is start having conversations with your kids about this, and have them from a standpoint of curiosity, of even like, hey, what do you or your friends know about Chat GPT? And like, what are some of the cool things? Like, don't start out with this is of the devil,
Hmm.
because you're just because even if you think it's
That's
of the
right.
devil, your kids will shut you out immediately. And I think that the average child, and especially teenagers' ability to think ahead and seriously consider nuanced potential dangers is almost zero. Like, be careful because this could potentially be bad. It's like, yeah, whatever, I'm invincible. So I think as a parent, one of the things I want to do is approach it with curiosity as much as I can with my child, of like, hey, so start out with like, have you heard about it? Do your friends use it for anything? What are some cool things that you see use it for? What do you know that anybody's using it for that like maybe is a little bit sketchy at this point? And so you just kind of get them talking. And what can you imagine would be some of the most awesome things that are going to come around the bend? And then also, what can you imagine that this could be harmful for? Like, do you have any friends that you see they're already so addicted to their phones that now if they have some AI companion, you may never see them again because they will just totally go into that. Do you have friends that you can imagine are going to try to cheat their way through school? So like, you can do it in a way where you're pulling out questions and getting conversations, because as much as possible, you need to be on the same team as your children. But remember, like, you're trying to figure out this technology, they're trying to figure out life, all of life. And so, um, I don't know. I don't want to be shut off by my kids because I'm aware of the danger way ahead of what they are. And then the other is just as a parent, you know, be really wise on the amount of freedom that your kids have to explore this stuff. Just like you would be very foolish to let your child I mean, be like, okay, my kid can have TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook. And there are plenty of parents that do that. And there's a lot of danger that happens when you do. So I would say, especially because this technology is so new and so unknown, you really want to tiptoe into it carefully, especially with giving your children unfiltered access to it. So Scott, how are there any safeguards yet in place to give your children filtered access or monitored access? What do you suggest?
Well, you can use technology, like a technology like Bark, and you can actually set up filters. You can use DNS filtering and just block the app altogether. I like what you were saying. In fact, again, using another media analogy here, but I just remember an episode of Gilmore Girls where Rory is going to a Harvard interview with a family, and they're playing a game at the dinner table. I love that idea. I love the idea, and I know it sounds kind of crazy, but you could ask a question about something that came from Chat GTP, and then say, okay, is it really correct? And then getting your kids to formulate an opinion about it. So it's almost like, well, does this sound too robotic to you?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, why? So it's almost like, again, playing Trivial Pursuit with your kids. I also think that having some things that you yourself as a parent go and grab from Chat GTP and just, like I said, make a game of it. And what you're doing there is you're helping your child to develop some critical thinking skills. Because again, just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's true. That's why we have fiction and nonfiction. And so what you can do is work with your kids to formulate some healthy dialogue so that they're formulating their answers, and they're also starting to synthesize what is generated and what's not. Because I will tell you, it's interesting. Turnitin, which is a plagiarism prevention technology that's used in a lot of colleges and schools, they have just integrated an AI tool to tell you if it's been AI generated or not, as far as an assignment's concerned. And it's not perfect. In fact, most of the time, I mean, it could give you 40%, but it could also be quoting you from another place, right?
Oh yeah. Huh.
So I do think that, if you can engage your children in that way, that's one thing to do. But as far as basically preventing or even kind of blocking certain things, you've got to know your kids. And so, for example, whether it's an iPhone, and actually Android actually has a little bit more flexibility as far as what you can prevent on their devices. But really, to be honest with you, those tools are only as good as the conversation you're having with your kids. Whether it's pornography, whether it's putting things out on the internet, if you're not having that healthy dialogue, that's one of the things that you need to start with. But the other thing too is, I'm just going to say, no technology whatsoever. I mean, get your kids outside, get them away from the technology, help them to have something, another outlet other than being on a screen. I mean, to be honest with you, that right there is where that healthy balance is. In fact, I remember with my niece, even I asked her about her Facebook time as a high schooler. She says she didn't have time for it. She was involved in cheerleading. She was involved with all these other things. And so, point being is, when they have something other than a screen, then there's your prevention right there in a nutshell.
Yeah. Scott, I think this is a good tiptoe into this, and we might have to 1 year from now revisit and think about just talk about all of the things we didn't see coming, some of the ones that came true, and then how do we recalibrate? Because a lot of parenting is adapting, recalibrating, learning as you go. Remembering, I think, giving grace for moms and dads. We are the first generation in human history dealing with the specific issues that we're dealing with. We're the first generation of parents dealing with phones, like with portable phones. My parents never had to deal with that, so I have no frame of reference. I'm making it up as I go along. And so now, especially on this AI front, give yourself some grace as a mom and dad, because we are the first generation to ever have to do this, and our kids are the first generation exposed to it. So it's going to be a lot of bumps in the way, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon to see where this is heading. So thanks so much for your time, Scott. I appreciate it.
Hey, it was great meeting with you. And if you have any other questions, just let me know, man.